Good evening, friends, and happy Easter. Tonight I would speak with you about the darkest fear in the political consciousness of our fellow Americans: fascism. Like blackest sorcery, the word conjures images of skeletal figures and mass graves, oceanic crowds of brainwashed subjects cheering a brutal tyrant, uniformed soldiers checking identification papers, barbed wire and rifles, tanks and fighter planes, supermen bred to eradicate the weak. Funny, isn't it, how the word liberalism does not conjure images of the firebombing of civilians, despite the Allied annihilation of Dresden in the Second World War, mass starvation, despite the treatment of the Germans after the Great War, degeneracy, despite epidemic pedophilia, rampant perversion, and the blatant embrace of moral ambiguity, physical weakness, and spiritual decadence. Domestic surveillance programs, despite the well-publicized efforts of the NSA, FBI, DHS, ATF, and several other federal agencies. Eternal war, despite the 40-year Cold War, the 40-year war on drugs, and the near 15-year war on terror. Or mass imprisonment, despite the fact that the United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. Perhaps the reason that the mention of democratic liberalism does not conjure such images for us is that we have been so well trained by our liberal institutions, the public education system and the mass media foremost among them, that we, like Pavlov's dogs, are triggered to react with repulsion when we hear the word fascism, triggered to react with salivating tongues when we hear the words democracy, freedom, tolerance. Perhaps we are nothing more than brainwashed animals. Oh, but that is a thought too dark, too conspiratorial, too unimaginable. We Americans are free in all the ways the Italians under Mussolini were not. We are masters of our own destiny in all the ways the Germans under Hitler were not. We are able to think, to speak, to act in all the ways the Spaniards under Franco were not. The fascists were and remain to this day sexist, homophobic, racist, anti-Semitic, chauvinist hate-mongers who use brute force as a political tool to suppress speech and the arts and enforce government control over the economy. Or at least this is the lie we have willingly swallowed all these decades. And we have expanded this definition further and further until today the label of fascist means absolutely nothing. Today, an internationalist liberal like Donald Trump can be called a fascist, and millions will agree with the label. As we have seen with my own Senate campaign, libertarians have been physically attacked as fascists, and communists all across North America have applauded the violence. Today, a man with Hispanic children can be called a racist. A polyamorous with bisexual mistresses can be called a homophobe. A man who worships the goddess can be called a sexist. Today, it is anti-Semitic to speak out against international finance or the occupation of Palestine. It is chauvinist to fight for your country. It is hate-mongering to refuse to apologize for being white. Today, the word fascist means nothing anymore, unless it means I hate you without reason and have run out of labels. I have been called a fascist in so many media outlets and by so many political opponents from left to right that it will take historians centuries to tally it all. And though none of these critics can actually put their finger on what it is that makes me a fascist, I have had more speaking engagements than I can count canceled on the grounds of my fascism. It is time, then, to address the label, which I have seen fit to ignore all this time. The fact is that I am very well versed in fascism. While in law school, I studied alternative political theories to a degree unknown in modern pedagogy, including medieval monarchism, ancient Greco-Roman tyranny and democracy, and even Jewish law. I worked for a think tank called the International Human Rights Law Institute in Chicago. While there, I worked for its president emeritus, an Egyptian professor by the name of M. Sharif Bassiouni. One day, while working as his research assistant on a paper concerning the laws of armed conflict, I came across a quotation of Thomas Hobbes that I was positive was exactly backwards. The professor had quoted Hobbes as saying that truth, not authority, makes law. I knew this to be incorrect, but I had to prove it. In researching the statement of Hobbes, I found myself traveling to Evanston from Chicago to read his Leviathan in the original Latin. There I confirmed what I had known all along. Auctoritas non veritas facit legem. Authority, not truth, makes law. A far more interesting development than reading an original copy of Leviathan was discovering the work of Carl Schmitt, who has been one of my primary legal, political, intellectual, and philosophical influences. We will discuss Schmitt's work more in our next Fireside chat on the hypocrisy of liberals and their use of violence. For now, it should suffice to say that my discovery of Schmitt's work led me to study fascism as a political theory in depth. We have already discussed what is commonly associated with the word fascism. Now I will tell you what the actual characteristics of fascism are. Nationalism, a hatred of international finance, a resurrection of the golden age of one's country, the ideal of heroism, the promotion of virtue ethics, and the recognition of the spiritual over the material. If these things make me a fascist, then so is every patriotic American a fascist. What patriotic American does not love his country? What patriotic American does not loathe the devastation wrought on our economy by international finance? What patriotic American does not hold dear the colonial revolutionaries, the founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution from our golden age? What patriotic American does not hold in high esteem our military heroes? What patriotic American does not believe in honor, courage, commitment, sacrifice, duty? What patriotic American does not believe that God and country come before money? A belief in order, an appreciation of history, opposition to communism and internationalism, respect for the family and the church, are these things evil? Then why has fascism become the ultimate boogeyman? No doubt because of the gas chambers and the mass graves and the Second World War. But take a look in the mirror, America. And those of you who put communist regimes on a pedestal, look again with a sober eye. All political systems, all religious systems, all systems of humankind whatsoever are corruptible. All have perpetrated atrocities, whether in the name of God or of humankind. If you think the death toll of the fascists is higher than the liberals and the communists, then look again. And if you think that this death toll justifies using fascist as an epithet to avoid debate, then your intellectual integrity is in question. I stopped debating the label of fascist long ago in this campaign. It is simply not a constructive quarrel to entertain. No one using the label has any idea what they even mean by it, and putting myself on the defensive is both counterproductive and degrading. So I do not bother. Neither will I bother with saying that I am not now nor have I ever been a fascist, as though I felt obligated to subject myself to the modern Inquisition. I have made quite clear where I stand. Anyone in the world can listen to the scores of speeches on YouTube, read the platform on the campaign website, or simply pay attention. Is it fascistic to want to end the financial crisis and the war on drugs, or to prohibit special interests from controlling our politicians? Is it fascistic to want our military to act in America's interests and not in the interest of Israel or the United Nations? Is it fascistic to want our Constitution and Bill of Rights restored, along with due process, the right against warrantless search and seizure, the right to bear arms, the right to freedom of speech and association? Is it fascistic to hate corruption and the stranglehold of finance, to preach resistance to consumerism and decadence, to fight for the welfare of our countrymen and the sanctity of our soil? If so, then call me a fascist. I will gladly wear the label, and I hope you will too. But if these things make us patriotic Americans or libertarian nationalists, perhaps those labels would be more constructive in future conversations. Next week, we will discuss the hypocrisy of democratic liberals, Marxists, and other leftists in decrying the use of violence by fascists. For now, I hope we have at least demonstrated the stupidity of using the word fascist as a catch-all pejorative label. Until then, comrades.